Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
For some context, my cousin and I are the same age. We are both women and currently 25 years old. She is only 5 days younger than me, and her family rented a floor in my parents' house when we were toddlers, so we basically did everything together and spent all our days together until we turned 5, when her family bought an apartment in another city. Since we had a very strong connection, almost codependent, it was very difficult for us to get used to not living together, and 2 years later we have made an agreement with our parents that we will visit each other each weekend. And during the summer break she will spend 1 week at our place and I will spend the other week at their place, and we will basically exchange like that until the end of the summer break. This went on for years. Since we were spending all our free time together, by the time we turned 10 we have already exhausted all our adventure ideas in the backyard. Tree climbing, building a tree house, setting up tents, camping in the backyard and stuff. And we really needed something new, so we have decided to go fishing together every Friday on the river near my house. Now, of course we had no tools needed for a true fishing experience. We had a butterfly net that we would place in the water, and on a good day we would catch a dozen of tiny fish with it. That was enough for our restaurant game. We would come back home, bake the fish under the sunlight, and then serve it and decorate it in plastic plates that we would later serve to our imaginary customers. We've done this for weeks and always made sure we were safe while doing it, and that wasn't that difficult since it's a very peaceful neighborhood, and there was usually no one else at the river at the time we were there. But one day it was different, very different. How I remember it, a couple of days ago the memory of this encounter suddenly spilled out in my mind. We were either 10 or 11 years old and it was Friday. She was at our place that week, so we took the butterfly net and went fishing on the river. We were alone, sitting under a large willow tree right next to the river. Suddenly a man showed up from nowhere. He was standing a couple of meters away from us. He had a blackish hair with plenty shades of gray, so I'm guessing he was in his late 40s or early 50s. He had a dark blue shirt, a little smudged on the collar. He asked us what we were doing and we said we were fishing. He continued walking back and forth on that part of the shore. Then he came a little closer and we got up. He told us he was having issues with his wife and we just nodded our heads, trying to avoid the conversation and follow the don't talk to strangers rule. We didn't ask him anything. He took a flip phone out of his pocket and opened it in front of us. "I have to show you my wife." He said. "Okay," we replied. When he found what he was looking for, he came even closer and turned the phone towards us. It was a picture of a completely naked woman sitting in a chair with her legs spread. We just nodded. He then proceeded to show us more pictures, and it was quite clear that it wasn't his wife because the pictures were of the same woman. But all of them were naked, from head to toe, with their legs spread or in other very suggestive positions. Now that I think of it, the quality of the images, the fashion, and the aesthetics could be best described as adult content from the 70s. It could be that he took pictures from some old magazine or had them sent by someone. I remember I looked at my cousin and mouthed, "It's not his wife," and she nodded. "Isn't she beautiful?" he asked. "She is," I replied, and my cousin nodded. We then remembered that we have left our net in the river, so we went back to the willow tree and reached for the net. He was standing there in the same spot as before, looking at his phone. He then showed us a very low quality picture of 2 naked men and another naked woman. This picture actually looked like pictures taken with a flip phone camera. "This is me," he said and pointed at one of the men in the picture. We just nodded and said we had to go home. He then said the words that have been haunting me for days now. "You think my wife is beautiful? She thinks you are beautiful too. She would love to meet you. Come with me to meet her and we can play together." "No, we have to go home," I replied. "You little party breaker. Maybe your friend doesn't want to go home." "Come on, I want to play with you," he said and turned to my cousin. "No, I really want to go home." My cousin replied. This is where the details of the memory stop. What I remember next is him giving up, just not being there anymore, and us leaving, giggling and laughing as we walked away and mocking his voice and his tone on our way back home. But I found it weird that only after so many years have I remembered this situation, and I've brushed it off as a potential dream or false memory. But since his words kept echoing in my head, I called my cousin and described my memory word for word as I've described it here, and she said that it did happen, just slightly different from how I've remembered it. How my cousin remembers it, it happened. All the details are correct, but once she told him she really wants to go home. He was way too close and we were scared to start running or turn our backs, since we thought that he could catch us, so we stayed there for a while and kept pretending like he was not there. We played with our cat, the tiny fish, in a bucket filled with water, and talked about our fathers who work in the police and how they're so strong that they could kill a man with one punch. The man didn't believe our exaggerated story and he kept walking in circles around us, not too close, but he did keep an eye on us the entire time. And we waited, and waited, and waited, and at one point he went into the bushes behind us to take a piss. This is when we got up and started running. We ran across the bridge and kept running until we got to the part of the neighborhood where there are lots of houses. When we were already close to my house, I stopped in the middle of the road and said that my legs won't move, so she helped me get down on the side of the road and we sat there until I felt better. Today I know that what I experienced was a state of shock. Once I felt better, we went back home, threw away the fish, and decided to never go fishing again. For some background first, I'm a 29-year-old woman. I live in an apartment in a sketchier side of my town, so I'm not unaccustomed to strange people pulling up and strange things happening. I've been through a home break-in, so I'm very hyper-vigilant when it comes to keeping myself and my home safe. I also smoke cigarettes, nasty habit I know, but having cats and not wanting my house to reek like smoke, I'll walk out to my balcony to smoke. That's exactly what I was doing when this happened. I was sitting on my balcony, smoking and just enjoying my night, when I noticed a car I've never seen before pull into the back parking lot of my apartment right by my balcony. I initially felt a bit off, but I didn't want to come off as being the paranoid neighbor, so I keep sitting and smoking my cigarette. Then I hear footsteps making a beeline through my backyard. There's a large and burly man that I've never seen before walking briskly through my backyard. Again, I still don't try to make much of it because they might be there for my neighbor. My anxiety is definitely on alert, but not in panic mode, until I realize he's going straight for my portion of the backyard. He then does something that is still freaking me out as I type this. He stops right in my backyard and looks up at me on my balcony, not saying a word. Now I'm in absolute panic mode. I audibly say, "Oh no," spring up, slam and lock my balcony door, run to my upstairs bathroom, and dial 911. I listened to every sound from downstairs while I stood panicking in my bathroom, and truthfully it sounded like someone was messing with my back door. I don't know for sure because I was in hypervigilance. I do know he was in my backyard for a few minutes because I was in my bathroom for several minutes until I decided to peek out my balcony window. I saw him walking to his car and getting in. That also tells me that I don't think he was here to rob me, but something more sinister. Luckily he was lazy because again, I live on the cheaper side of town, so you can imagine the quality of my doors and locks. I'm really hoping it was just some guy who was drunk, high, and had the wrong house, but my gut is telling me otherwise. Regardless, I hope we never meet again. I'm a woman in my 30s who lives alone in a small house at the head of a quiet cul-de-sac in the United Kingdom. The street is a maze of roads away from the main road, which means that other than delivery guys and the occasional salesperson, you very rarely see anyone that you don't recognize. I don't exactly know all my neighbors, but I know what they look like and I know where they live. I can recognize their cars and stuff. This weirdness happened over the space of a few months several years back. I work from home, so I'm usually in, and sometimes I don't have a lot to do. The first day was one of those lazy days. It was about 4 in the evening and I'm sitting on the sofa watching some daft stuff about alien cover-ups. Someone knocked on the door. I have a surveillance camera hidden in the wooden canopy above the front door, so I checked to see who it was because I wasn't expecting any deliveries and I couldn't be bothered to deal with a salesperson. It was a woman who looked late to early 50s, very smartly dressed, like really expensive clothes and jewelry, stuff I could never afford. Most people around here generally couldn't afford it either. We're not an affluent area and this lady stuck out like a sore thumb. She looked flustered and agitated, glancing towards the back garden before trying to look through the tiny, frosted glass window on the front door. I noticed she was carrying a dog's lead, but I didn't see a dog. As it happens, at the far side of my back garden there are 2 hedges. There's the hedge that I own within my property boundaries, and there's a second hedge outside my boundary that's council owned along a small grassland where people walk dogs. I know for a fact there is a hole in the council owned hedge, which I've reported it to the council at least a dozen times over the past decade, and they've done the square root of sod all about it. Because of my hedge, I can't reach it to do anything about it myself. Consequently, when I saw the dog's lead I thought, okay, I bet her dog has gone through the hole. If it's a big dog, it's not getting into my garden, but if it's a small dog it might be able to work its way through, and I've always got some cooked meat, so I figured I might be able to lure it out. I am a dog lover, so of course, I want to help this woman if I can. When I was a kid, my own dog went missing for a few weeks and I thought I was never going to get him back. I was heartbroken for those weeks, but fortunately, we did get him back, and ever since I've been extremely sensitive to pets in need. I opened the door and this woman gives me the weirdest look, like she was expecting someone completely different to answer the door and that I shouldn't be there. To be fair to her, my mom used to live here too, so I didn't think much of that weird look to begin with. Maybe she was expecting my mom. I say hello and she just stares at me for the longest 30 seconds before she tries to look past me and asks to see Margaret. I don't know what it is about other people's mistakes, but whenever someone has the wrong number, I always end up apologizing as if it's my fault. So that's what I did, apologize apologized and told her there was no Margaret at this address. Again, she gives me that look, only this time there's anger behind it. Yes, there is. She insists. It occurs to me at this point that I have a relative called Margaret, but she lives about 60 miles away and I haven't seen her in years. Nonetheless, just in case she's got her addresses muddled, I ask, are you looking for Margaret? But she just hisses at me, you know exactly who I'm looking for. What have you done with her? I'm absolutely lost at this point. I've lived here 20 years, and I know the name of the previous owner, so I know she's not asking for them. I also know the names of the neighbors, and the names of the people who have lived on the street in the time I've been here and since moved. None of them are called Margaret, so all I can do is tell her she's got the wrong address. No, this is. You're lying. That was a tad alarming, and she's at the right address. She's not knocked on the wrong door. However, she clearly thinks I've done something to somebody who to the best of my knowledge has never lived here. I don't know how long the previous owner had this house, but we must be talking about at least 30 years since anyone called Margaret might have lived here. It's at this point that I notice that she's subtly wrapped that dog lead around her now clenched fist like she's planning to use it as a weapon. In my youth, I did plenty of self-defense training, so I'm not exactly scared of her as such, but I'm obviously getting a bit concerned about the situation that's brewing. I don't particularly wish to get involved in a brawl on my doorstep with a complete stranger. I'm torn between shutting the door in her face or trying to de-escalate the situation. In the end, I close the door a little so she's got less to aim at and tell her, look, I don't know who you're looking for, but if you think something's happened to your friend, maybe we should just call the police and let them sort it out. Sure enough, the woman slams her fist with the lead wrapped around it into my door. I later discovered she'd struck the door hard enough to crack the frosted glass window in the middle of it. She's bleeding from doing it. It must have hurt, but she doesn't flinch or show any sign of pain. Any confidence I had in my self-defense classes started to waver here because I'm not used to people who don't feel pain. All I can think now is that she's on something and having a really bad trip, so at this point I put on my scariest voice and tell her to get back. I let her know I'm calling the police, and if she's still here when they get here, she can deal with them because I'm not dealing with her anymore. She tries to stop me from closing the door, but I shove her back and manage to get it closed and locked. I make a point to stand next to the door while I'm calling 999 so she could hear me. While I'm waiting for the police to turn up, I watch her on the surveillance feed. She moves out of shot multiple times, presumably to check the back of the house, and I hear her calling out for Margaret. A few minutes before the police finally turn up, I see her kick over my wheelie bins in a rage, but then the most chilling thing happens. She walks back to the front door and literally stares directly into my camera. That camera is pretty well hidden. I'm not saying that nobody could spot it, but most people would only know it was there if they'd been looking for it. Most people aren't looking for cameras, right? She knew it was there. She must have eyeballed it previously. When, I don't know, I later reviewed all of the footage I had from that day, and she never made eye contact with it once. She never even looked in that direction. I only had about a week's worth of footage before the oldest footage is overwritten, and I checked everything I had and she was only on camera that day. All I can think is she'd been here more than a week prior. While she's staring right into it, she flips me the finger and then makes a throat-cutting gesture before walking off. I head to the window to watch her leave, and she's walking like she doesn't have a care in the world. She doesn't look back, just wanders away. Police finally show up, take a statement. I give them a copy of the surveillance footage, and that's that. I called a couple of times to follow up, but nothing. Nobody ever called me about it. I won't lie, that had me up for a few weeks. I moved a knife block closer to the door. I started staying up really late and not getting much sleep, which really didn't help. On some nights I was so tired that I started experiencing auditory hallucinations. I'd hear people who weren't there talking, and because this woman was the cause of all my stress, I heard her voice and the name Margaret most of all. Every time I heard the gate open, it put me on edge. I review the surveillance footage every day. Eventually, as the weeks passed and I hadn't heard anything else, I started to regain some of my comfort and just put it down to a weird experience. It didn't last. About 4, maybe 5 weeks after the first encounter, she came back. It was just after midnight. I was in the living room mucking about on my phone with the TV on low volume for some background noise. I heard a car door slam and peeked out the front window. A dark colored car was parked at the end of my driveway. I couldn't see what make or model it was, but it looked like some sort of estate car. I didn't see anyone moving about, but a minute or two later, the front gate swung open with its metallic groaning and there was a knock on the door. Even when I'm not involved in a blood feud over imaginary Margarets, I'm not going to answer the door at that time. I checked the surveillance camera. Its night vision mode is pretty bad, but I'm positive it's that woman again. I can even see what I think is the dog lead. And of course, she knows I'm watching her because because she looks at the camera again, and I tell you, when someone is already giving you the chills, the way night vision makes people's eyes look like soulless black voids doesn't do much to make you feel better. Suddenly, she yells out, "Shut that racket off and come out here." Now, I had the TV on, but as I mentioned, it was on a very low volume. There's no way she could hear it from outside the front door. I couldn't even hear it if I walked into the hallway. I'm convinced at this point she's mentally unwell, so I call the police again. I want them to stay on the line, but they just tell me that someone will be over soon and to call them back immediately if things escalate. So I'm waiting, watching, and just hoping she doesn't start trying to smash a window or something. She kicks over my wheelie bins again and yells something else out, which I couldn't quite make out, but whatever it was enough for one of the neighbors to come and investigate themselves. I watched the neighbor talkie with her for a minute. She's remonstrating about something, wagging her finger towards my front door, but my neighbor is eventually able to get her to leave. He even sticks around for a bit to make sure she's gone. Sadly, that also means she'd gone before the police turned up again and made me feel like I was a bother to them. Another statement, handing over more security footage, or nothing. I caught up with the neighbor the next day, and he apologized because it didn't occur to him to make a note of the registration plate. But he told me that she'd said much the same thing as she'd said to me previously, that she wanted to know where Margaret was and what I'd done with her. I'm grasping for answers at this point, even if she's mentally unwell. The fact she's sticking to this Margaret story and has the right address makes me think there's something more to this than somebody having a breakdown. Then it clicks. Is Margaret her dog? Does she think that I've stolen her dog? Did she have a dog go through the hole in the back? Does she think I've hurt her dog? Is that what this is about? It'd be another few weeks before she came back. This time at 3 in the night, I'm awoken by knocking on the door. A few minutes later, I hear tapping on the bedroom window. I know it's her. I can hear her saying things, but I can't really make them out because they're too muffled through the windows. It's like she didn't want to get the neighbor out again, so she's trying to keep it quiet. I jump out of bed and put some clothes on as quickly as I can. I try and follow her as best I can as she moves around the outside of the house from room to room, knocking, tapping, and muttering. I think I hear a few coherent words like noise, racket, and I'm pretty sure she called me a slur, but maybe I was imagining that. I can't check the surveillance footage this time because she spray painted the lens, not that it'd matter much this time. She's not lingering by the front door. I think about calling the police again, but it's proven a waste of time so far, and I get the feeling if I call them out a third time and she's gone, then they're just going to start accusing me of wasting their time even if I do have the evidence. They've not exactly been that helpful so far. In the end, I wait by the front door and listen for her. Eventually, she knocks again and I call out, "Is Margaret your dog?" Dead silence. Nothing. I can't see anything through the frosted glass because it's too dark. I have no idea where she is and I don't want to turn the outside lights on. I don't even know why. She knows I'm in the house because I've called out to her, but I still don't want to draw any more attention to myself. I end up standing there for who knows how long. At least an hour, probably more because the sun starts coming up. My heart is going a mile a minute pretty much the whole time. Once it's bright enough, I start checking through windows to see if I can see her. Nope, nothing. I tentatively open the front door and look outside. Still can't see her. I grab something to arm myself with just in case, can't remember what now, and check all around my house and the back garden. She's not there. As I'm heading back to the front door, I spot the oddest thing. The gate's closed. That gate is physically attached to the side of my house, and when it opens and closes, it makes a fair bit of noise. You definitely hear it if someone opened or closed it when you were standing next to the front door, but it's closed. So what does that mean? Did she jump it somehow? It's possible, I guess, but I wouldn't want to try it. Anyway, I open the gate and head out to the end of the driveway. I look around and there's no sign of anyone. I turn back to the house and see she spray painted liar on the front of my house and left the dog lead on the floor beneath it. That was, thankfully, the last time I ever heard from or saw this woman, but I think she still comes by sometimes. Ever since all this happened, I get these creeped out feelings occasionally at night and check out the window. I don't know whether I'm imagining it or what, but now and again, I swear I see a dark colored estate car out on the street. Not parked at the end of my driveway these days, but I just can't shake the feeling she's in there, watching my house. Perhaps she was looking for her dog and she keeps thinking that she'll see me with it. I was backpacking in the Balkans, and as I wanted my trip to last long, but I didn't have that much money, I had to sacrifice comfort a lot of times. This was the reason I booked the midnight train in Greece from Thessaloniki to Athens. During my stay in Thessaloniki, I mainly stayed in the center and the Bay Area, which looked nice, just like any other big European city. However, the train station was in a different area. I had to check out from my hotel in the morning, so I spent the whole day out in the city. In the afternoon in the sketchy area where the train station was because I wanted to stay close to it so I could get there in a reasonable reasonable time in the afternoon and spend the night there so I couldn't have to walk around in that area at 11 at night. That part of the city looked a lot less appealing. It was full of garbage, graffiti, homeless people, and sketchy, creepy people. The train station wasn't that much better. It had a semi-closed-in coffee shop in it. I stayed there as long as I could, but it closed at 8 in the night. While I was sitting in that coffee shop and looking down at my phone, I snapped my head around when I heard a loud noise. The guy dressed as a soldier rushed in the coffee shop and he was looking around like if he was searching for someone or something. The coffee shop was really small. It was just maybe like 5 or 6 tables and there was only one guest besides me. He saw me for sure, but didn't do anything. He went to the counter to order. He was speaking very loudly even though it was relatively quiet there. I found it weird but didn't think much of it, especially because he was speaking in Greek which I didn't understand. The coffee shop closed at 8 in the night, so I packed up my bags and went outside. There were a lot of weird people loitering there. They didn't look like they were waiting for a train. I say this because I wanted to take a look on the tracks in advance so I'll know how to get to my train in time, and when I was doing that, a train came to the station and almost all of the people from the waiting room ran to the train, but they weren't getting on it nor greeting someone who got off. They were just walking up and down the track until the train set off. Also, they were all middle-aged men. There weren't any women or children among them. I went back to the waiting area and sat down on a bench. I was a bit nervous, so I plugged in my earphones and I was browsing something on my phone. However, I wanted to still be able to hear the things around me, so I wasn't listening to music or anything, which I'm glad I didn't because not too long after I sat down I heard someone saying next to me, "Nice tattoo. Is it from Up?" I knew they said it to me because I have a tattoo from the movie Up on my forearm, so I pulled out my earphones and looked next to me. There was the soldier from before sitting next to me. It was weird, he started talking to me in English automatically, but I have a little Hungarian flag on my backpack which indicates that I'm not Greek. I replied to his question and we started talking. The conversation at first was pretty normal. We were talking about tattoos and movies, then traveling. When I mentioned I wanted to visit Macedonia in this trip, he got a little political and heated. He started talking about Greek politics and the relationship between Greece and Macedonia very angrily. Through the whole conversation he was acting a bit weird. I can't explain why, but it looked like something was off about him. At first I was relieved that I was next to a soldier in this sketchy place, but after a while I started to question if he really was a soldier or just pretending to be one, because he was creepy and he was constantly checking his bag, but just from the outside he looked like there was a long object in it which could have been a gun. But if he really is a military person, then it could be normal. I don't know the Greek laws if they are allowed to carry their weapons off duty or not. He asked me if I was traveling alone and for how long I planned to stay in Athens. I answered with honesty. I told him I was alone and that I didn't plan to stay for long in Athens as I was planning on catching a ferry from there. He then asked me if I'd like to stay in his place for free, but I declined. He asked this a few more times, but I said no every time, and then the speakers turned on and they announced that the train to Athens will be here soon. So we both got up and started to head to the tracks. He said he needs to get his luggage from the luggage storage, so we stopped there. It was right next to the steps to the train tracks. He took out a big, old, heavy suitcase from there. It looked like even he was suffering from its weight. Then he really loudly slammed the storage's metal door. I don't know why he did this. It was unnecessarily loud. Everyone was looking at us. It really was loud. The whole station could have heard it. We then started walking up the stairs, but he stopped and said he needed to use the restroom and asked me to wait for him there with his suitcase. He didn't even wait for my answer. He ran back to the waiting room. It was really odd. Why would he trust a stranger with his luggage and leave it with me? I stood there for a few minutes and was waiting for him, but I started contemplating if I should just leave his suitcase there because I was afraid that I'd miss my train. I even thought about that. What if there was a bomb inside the suitcase? Otherwise, why else would he leave his belongings with a random girl he just met? The fact that he was acting really strange didn't help with it either. I waited a few minutes, then he showed up. He asked me once again if I wanted to stay in his place in Athens, but I said no again. We got up to the tracks and our train just came in. He insisted on sitting next to each other, but I didn't want to sit next to him, so I said I have a seat reservation and that I'm really tired. I probably sleep through the night anyways. He said he'll ask the person working on the train if I can switch seats with a reservation. He left his luggage next to me once again and went to the nearest employee. This time I didn't stay there. I got up the train and looked for my seat. Fortunately, there were a lot of people, so I blended in easily. I took my seat, and a few minutes later a normal looking man sat next to me. Thankfully, the soldier didn't come looking for me, and I've never seen him again, not even in the Athens train station. I know this story is not too extreme, but it still bugs me to this day to what were his intentions. Was he really a soldier and a nice guy, just a bit weird, with some kind of mental illness? Or a crazy psychopath pretending to be a soldier to look more trustworthy? This story takes place a few years ago while I was still with my ex-girlfriend. I, a 22-year-old male, was 17 to 18 at this moment. I was living with my parents and we lived in a little town of 300 people. It's literally the camping with 3 farms in this town, which includes lots of fields. We had the habits of walking in those fields thanks to a little path which is really old. There's a place for only one car, a truck, and a tractor. It was the afternoon, around 5 to 6. We decided to eat some stuff in a field near the road, so we can see the road and people on the road can see us. The field, which belongs to my neighbor, who are okay with the fact that we're here, is separated from the road thanks to barbed wire. We smoke weed, we drink, we eat, and we listen to music. Everything is alright. However, at one point, a car parked on the middle of the road and a guy went out of his car and is doing stuff in the bushes. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, the dude is just picking stuff up like nuts or whatever because it's the end of the summer. But I keep an eye on him. I talk with my girlfriend just like I did all afternoon until then, and I look back at him. The guy is standing still behind his car and he's looking right at us. Motionless, I don't say anything and looked back at my girlfriend. I give another look about a minute later. The guy moved. He's now at the other side of his car and same thing. No bullshit, just looking at us. The same process is about to be repeated 2 or more times with him at different locations around his car. I have chills and thinking this situation isn't normal at all. The guy suddenly went back into his car and moved away. At this moment, I told to my girlfriend, pack up your things, we're moving. She thinks I'm overreacting, thinking I'm paranoid because of the weed we smoked, but she listens to me. We're back on the road, going the other way the guy went. The road is a circle, every way leads back to my house. And guess who has turned around and is coming right behind us with his car? This guy, still looking at us while driving. He keeps his road and turns around to keep staring at us. This process repeats 2 times. At this moment, my girlfriend told me I was right, so we took his plate and tried to call my parents. No one is answering. The last time the guy passed at our level, I can clearly see something on his passenger seat, but I don't know what. But my neighbor came right behind him with his truck. I stopped my neighbor and told her what we just witnessed. She gets us in the truck. We went back to my parents' home. My dad is a cop, so I told him the plate. He looked at it. The car belonged to a grandma and was stolen. A few weeks later, everything is normal. I go take my bus in the next town, which is about a 7-minute ride on my bike. It was still dark because it's pretty early in the morning. When I left my parents' home on my bike, I noticed light behind me. It was his car. I don't know how he knew I was there. Maybe it's pure bad luck for me, but I'm 100% sure it was his car. He followed me until I took a path which a car can't use, only bikes and pedestrians can take. I turned off my light and rode until I went to my bus in the complete dark in order to not be seen by this guy. I kept using this way for the next 2 years, and I've never met him again. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 in the evening until they closed. I usually didn't get off until 11 at night or so. I had a car, but was close enough to walk, so I did that most days to save gas. This particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists, tired, but happy to have a good job and just generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead, about a block from my place, I see an attractive guy in dark clothing walking, but not with a purpose really. He was taller than me, maybe 6 feet tall or so, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like, even in the dark of night I was starting to get excited. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and his thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out and, because I'm from a dangerous city and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him, maybe even flirt a little bit. How is your late night going? It's good, just looking to get drunk. Oh, that I can help with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I lived just down the street. That was, not verbatim, how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I got no red flags from this guy. He seemed totally normal and I was honestly thinking, wow, just through sheer luck I meet this super hunky guy and he seems cool and fun. I was beside myself really. So we get to my apartment on the 2nd floor. I jump into host mode and offer him to have a seat and make himself comfortable. The apartment is about 640 square feet, so it's very small. Except for the bathroom, you can see the rest of the apartment from any area. I head into the kitchen and while I'm pouring drinks, I glance back over at him. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he is more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he just was on our walk there. It was just odd to me. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink and sit down next to him. So, what do you do for work? I asked. Oh, I'm not here for prostitution. He put his drink down on the table. What do you mean? I'm not after that either. He stands up. What you got? He asks me. His nice guy vernacular muscular and friendly face are now gone. I'm having a hard time processing what he means by this. I said, "What you got?" The second I stand up, he pushes me back. I fly across the room, hitting the floor, but not hard enough to pass out or anything. I get right back up, but he's already grabbed my laptop and my work bag. As I start towards him, he cuts around me and makes his way towards the front door. I'm right behind him when he makes it outside. I manage to grab hold of him and we tussle again in front of the door. Now I shout out, calling on help from the neighbors. It's late at night so no one comes. I'm shouting, "Please help. I'm being robbed." The thing is, he has my laptop. It's not just any laptop. I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that laptop at the time. Important photos that I did not have backed up, thousands of dollars of music programs, video game programming stuff for a development team I helped, really expensive software, stuff like that. It was, in my mind, irreplaceable. I give chase down the stairs, across the dog walk park, and as I start to gain on him, we tussle again and the only thing I can focus on is my laptop. I knew that I had to, at any cost, get my laptop back. That was absolutely all I cared about. Somehow I get a grip on my laptop. I tug at it again and I guess he decides I'm not worth all of this struggle. He gets up and starts to take off again. I now realize he still has my work bag. It has my cell phone and wallet in it. I take off towards him again and this time, he shouts back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This makes me stop in my tracks and he gets away. Underneath a street lamp, along the sidewalk, I immediately inspect myself. Was I stabbed? No way. There's no way. Then I see blood running down my leg. I see blood on my arm. 2 places where he cut me good. I'm scared, but the blood makes it look worse than it is. I decide that's enough. I got my laptop and that's all I really wanted anyway. I hobble back home and get inside and lock my door. I called the cops using my neighbor friend's phone the next day and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds and declining medical services. So all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $40 in it. The cop called my friend back several days later and said that they were not able to find the guy and that he would keep me posted. This was years ago so I don't know where the robber is now, but I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. When I was younger and just got into online college, I got my first apartment. I had 3 jobs and one was third shift, but I was more than ready for independence. While I had a great time there, I did have one problem, my new downstairs neighbor. So the other tenants are a bit older than I am, with one of them being an old man who lived there for 20 years. The other was an older woman with a small kid probably been here for 3 or 4 years and an empty apartment downstairs. I keep to myself so I never really spoke to any of them before until I noticed that there was a new move-in. A man that seemed close to my age, maybe a little older, black greasy hair, and a little overweight, but in my experience living here people seem nice and I was happy to possibly have someone to say hello to. That possibility turned sour really quick when a casual hello turned into that trash stinks remarks from him when I was taking out the trash and snide remarks under his breath when I've done nothing, even remarking on my sister's lack of a bra when she came to visit me. Naturally I was grossed out and annoyed that he had to comment on anyone, especially my sister, and told the landlord. Nothing came of it, of course. One day I was asleep and someone came banging on my door. I had no idea who it was and my anxiety was beyond strong. I'm alone and never expect a knock that wasn't planned. It was the neighbor saying that I was being too loud and I need to stop harassing him. I explained through a closed door that I was asleep and that I was not making noise. He left and stomped down the stairs while muttering and calling me a rat for some reason. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. I went back to bed, only to hear him coming back up the stairs and bang on my door. When I addressed him again, he said that I was harassing him and that he's calling the cops because I'm still making noise. I told him to ask the other neighbor because there's no way that I could possibly be making noise when he is on the other side of the building. He thanks me politely before stomping off and continuing to call me a rat yet again. I tell the landlord right away that one of his tenants is acting hostile and I don't feel comfortable nor safe, and he tells me he will look into it. I hear nothing for a week. It turned out it was the old neighbor hitting the floor with a stick like one of those classic cartoons because the rude neighbor was playing music too loud. I swear he should have known that, as I'm on the other side. It was like he wanted an excuse to come speak to me. The following months it got worse. One day I walked out in a snowsuit so that I can play in the snow. He had to remark on my clothing being unnecessary, even when there's 3 feet of snow out. I forgot what I said in response, something like it's not his business, but he basically just said screw you. I just walked off to go play in the snow. It gave me little enjoyment because of the earlier interaction, so I went back home to get ready for work. The snowstorm got worse and I had just came back from my night shift. I see him alone in the parking lot with the car on and the windows up. I was on high alert as I carefully walked around and up the alley to my apartment. The second I closed the door to go upstairs, I hear loud, wall-shaking music. It's him. He's blasting his car music at max volume. In a snowstorm at 3 in the morning. I was surprised and confused because what was his reasoning? He did it until 8 in the morning, and I found out later it was despite the old neighbor for telling him his music is too loud. Soon it all started getting serious, cursing in the hallway and playing music louder, with the police knocking at our doors asking us about a noise disturbance, and now a mutual hatred amongst the neighbors at the jerk who kept us all up. But that's not the worst part. I just got back from my night shift and it's 3 in the morning yet again. I'm dragging my tired feet over to the mailboxes that are right inside the townhouse door. As I'm looking through the advertisements and letters, his door opens at the top of the stairs. My stomach tightens, hoping I don't have to interact with him, but drops when he starts speaking unintelligibly. At the top of the stairs, he's gurgling and mumbling something. "What?" I said, but he repeats the same weird sounds again, only more aggressive. I felt something was more than off, and got right around and out the door heading back to my car. I felt I'd rather sleep in my car than possibly be attacked in the hallway, and as I'm having the thought, I hear the window above slam open. I freeze and then spin back around the edge of the corner. It's him, and he's looking for me out the window. I stand there for a moment listening to him, and he's speaking gibberish and yelling. I thought to myself that it was my chance to sneak upstairs, past his door, and into my apartment. I sped up the stairs and past his door to the second flight of stairs. Right as I reach the top of second flight of stairs, his door swings open with a big slam that makes me jump, and I hear him muttering and gibberishly speaking loudly while walking up the stairs. My heart is beating out of my ribcage as I am simultaneously walking and fishing my keys out of my bag. I kept fumbling the keys looking for the correct one in the dark hallway as I hear him walking up the last couple steps. I mentally told myself not to panic as I spot the correct key and slide it into the keyhole on the first go. I swing the door open and practically launch myself inside before slamming it shut behind me. I pause and hold my breath as I hear him just 5 feet from my door, muttering gibberish and calling me a rat before walking back downstairs and out the building. I watched him through a crack in my window blind, pacing back and forth, muttering, cursing, and at one point screaming before walking off into the night. With a little bit of relief, I head to bed hoping he doesn't come back. The next day, I get a text from the landlord. He says that guy was arrested and won't be coming back. Seems he was off his medication again and attaches a link in the text. Of course, I raised an eyebrow to that comment thinking, now you tell me. The following link showed a mugshot and a description of his nightly activity to include stealing from a Turkey Hill, threatening cops that he'll shoot them, punching one of them, and previous to all this it said, earlier in the night when he dropped his pants and rubbed himself against a window then ran around the town square while yelling. Never did see him again, just his family coming in and moving his stuff. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We got up at 10:30 in the morning. I took a shower, then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked at our door they turned out to be salesmen, we kind of waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, and no one was there. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and saw in case it was just a bird flying by when a hand hit it, clear as day. We got scared. We didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was raining, we heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs so the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard. Hello, there is someone in our house. I think they are stealing. Then a pause. We are at our address. Another pause. I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry. While all that, I was sitting against the wall, hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. Then I heard the sound my cell phone does when it turns off, and I remembered leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod we had lying around there. He started kicking the door. Who was there? The man screamed. We said nothing. Another kick, then another. I felt I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache. I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that he stopped. We heard the door opening scene and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess, lots of papers and books on the floor. Thought cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were open and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs, in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom and she ordered us to go to my aunt's as soon as possible, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 7. My mom told her boss she had a home emergency, so she left early. She cleaned up the house and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciate her effort and my aunts to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived. She explained everything, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next days, my mom was home with us. Now I tell the story as a funny anecdote. Luckily, no one was hurt and he only took useless stuff. But at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over that after a couple of weeks. There's an abandoned house between my town and the town next to me on one of the country roads that connects us. I've been to it before and even went inside twice with my sister and my best friend. It's an old house that dates back centuries, according to the bank records that I was able to find, and you can just tell by the design. The house is 2 stories with a basement, has lots of furniture and objects strewn about inside, and is far from empty. You can tell that it hasn't been lived in for decades, and whoever had previously owned it, it almost seemed like they just disappeared one day, leaving everything behind. The way I was able to get in before was through the cellar door in the basement, which is broken open and propped up with some big sticks. My first visits were around 2 years ago, and I hadn't gone back at all into that time. Another friend had expressed interest in seeing the house when I told him about my experience, and so last summer I told him that I'd take him to it. I never thought it was a dangerous trip and told him that it's just an interesting place to explore. They parked across the street from the house in the parking lot of one of the industrial buildings nearby. The road was a rural road, but it was far from unused, and we didn't want to be questioned by anyone. My friend, being braver than me despite my previous visits, led the way across the street and to the front of the house. He asked me a couple questions about it and what stuff I found in there. I told him that the kitchen still had expired food in it and that the upstairs had a board game set that I ended up bringing home with me. As we walked from the front of the house to the side leading to the back with the cellar, I made note that there was a lot more brush than when I had went last time. I had gone in the spring when I had gone with my sister and best friend, and I never experienced the thick brush that I was now carefully moving through. I made a comment to my friend that there was a lot more foliage than when I had gone before, as we both tried to figure out a path to the cellar. Eventually, we pushed through some branches and found the cellar, broken and propped open just as I had last seen it. We talked for a second about being nervous, and I really took in the view of the cellar that led into this dark, abandoned house. I remember being really intimidated while looking at the opening, and I made note that some of the sticks propping open the cellar didn't look familiar to me. I didn't state it out loud, however, as I thought it was just my anxiety. My friend and I discussed who should go first, and he said since I'm the expert, I should head in first. I was hesitant, but eventually, after a good 5 minutes of breathing and calming myself down, I started down the few steps of the cellar. It was an awkward entrance, as half the cellar was collapsed and left little room for maneuvering. You had to duck under the part of the cellar door that was still put together, then inch your feet down the steps, and finally turn your body sideways to fit through the small gap into the basement. I took a long time after ducking under the door, since my nerves came back for a second. I made it in fine, and my friend followed very quickly, which I appreciated. We both stood in the corner of the basement now, taking it in. I turned my phone's flashlight on, and he did too. There was a spider web in the path to the stairs up to the first floor. I looked around and found some sort of tool to knock the spider web down, and I took the tool and swiped it through the web. After that, I tossed the tool onto the concrete floor. My friend and I talked quietly, I don't remember what about, but afterwards, we fell silent for a second. Above us, I clearly heard footsteps on the boards above our heads. It almost seemed like they were heading to the stairs that led down to the basement. I remember this part the best, as I looked at my friend, and he didn't seem to react to the footsteps I was hearing. I looked at him, suddenly very worried, and before I could even say anything, he said we need to go. He turned around and practically jumped up the stairs. I remember thinking he got out insanely fast. I could see him turn and reach his hand back to help me up. I was a bit slower, but I also quickly stepped up the stairs and he pulled me through the opening. I landed on my hands and knees after I escaped the cellar, and I immediately stood up facing the weeds. I turned around to my friend, who was crouched, staring down the cellar. I said to him that we should get out of here, and he turned away and told me to go first through the weeds. I pretty much just ran through the brush, definitely getting cut up by something, but we made it through them and back in front of the house very quickly. My friend kept urging me to go in front of him, and he watched behind us before switching to flashing his light in the windows on the first floor of the front of the house. I asked him what he was doing and if he was okay. He didn't really answer me at first, so I asked him if he heard the footsteps before we bolted out of the basement. He turned to me and said that he heard them, and that's why he was watching the cellar to see if anyone was following us out. He continued, saying that after he pulled me up, he turned to guide me away before he let go of my hand, and when he turned back, he saw the bare feet of someone standing at the bottom of the cellar. Because of the cellar's dilapidated structure, he could only see their feet and a part of their legs. At that point, that's when he told me to go through the weeds first. He never saw them come up the cellar stairs or move away from them before he followed me. I didn't believe him at first and thought he was just trying to scare me, but I could tell by the serious tone of his voice and the silent look he gave me after telling me that he wasn't trying to make me laugh or lighten the mood. I still asked if he was lying, and he aggressively said that he wasn't. He told me that I heard the footsteps already, so I knew something had to be in that house. We stood for a second, not really saying anything, before we both then agreed to go back across the street towards our cars. We stood by our cars for a while, watching the house to see if anything or anyone would come out, but nothing appeared. After talking for a bit about how crazy that was, and him reassuring me that he was telling the truth, it started to rain and we decided to call it a night. I fully believe him, and he's always stood by what he saw. I haven't gone back to that house since, and I like to tell myself that whoever was in that house was just a homeless person finding shelter. I still get shivers to this day, however, thinking about how close that person was to me as I scrambled up the cellar. Now this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Lee and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I am about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now when I was younger I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old toys, with chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psychiatric ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5, most of them were very bold. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and musk became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now. To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psychiatric ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, man, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to them. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotty meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its insides were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green shirt stained with what I assumed was blood and torn tan pants. He did not have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" He said each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. As we sat behind the metal door catching our breath for a second, all looking at each for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psychiatric ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit and we decided we wanted to go to the gym for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day the gym was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this gym had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I felt I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking, twisting the knob trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard 2 little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats at the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, "I think they want out." The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before a grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her end game? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding, or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? I apologize if there are some errors or things that may not make sense. This is the perspective my story told from me and a part by a friend. This happened to be the weekend of Halloween and I personally don't like talking about it, but I've been told by my friend to share it to get it off of my chest. We and a friend were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of the town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a sexy nurse outfit and I dressed as a belly dancer. Majority of the party took place in the house as there was maybe like 70 people, with the house being very spacious, so not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did have some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend in over to take some pictures and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left my cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said he's been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend. We always make sure to stay in contact with each other, and since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I had just forgotten. The man said it's urgent and said I can use his phone to call at one of the rooms. So not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I just ran a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel more weak, like I just got a migraine and just couldn't call. Then I was helped to lay down and within seconds, I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality and I realized I was in a bedroom with my friend cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly have been used. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom. But after like some minutes, I still didn't show, so she went looking for me, eventually checking the bedrooms and found me laying in bed with the guy sucking something out of my belly button. Apparently he was playing shots with my unconscious body and sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and kissing my lips. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off of work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but of course, no one knew who or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ends here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. At first, he was just asking me random things and I just didn't reply, but then it showed me a picture of my torso and started saying creepy things to me and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. This is still going on today, just texting me randomly. I've had the idea to try to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be and what he will do to me if things don't go as planned. I have contacted the police and asked what I can do. They took my phone in to copy the texts I received, but I'm sort of doubtful it will go anywhere. I honestly just believe it was a stranger who had bad intentions at the time and acted upon it. I'm not really even upset anymore. I just want to continue with my life and better myself from any other future events. Alright, this happened to me about 3 years ago. It was brought up recently with my friends and they suggested that I post it here. I have gone through therapy for this and trained in firearms because this was the creepiest night of my life. I spent a night in what felt like a horror movie and it's still so vivid. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work, my husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Australian mix and my 80-pound German Shepherd / Pit Bull mix. This particular night I remembered that the trash pickup comes the next day. I decided to turn on Game of Thrones for a bit, then I would take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realize it's 1:30 in the morning and I still haven't taken the trash to the curb. My house has 2 solid iron gates, one in the front and one to the side door / backyard. Lighting on our street isn't that great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families and you rarely hear about crime here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out and saw who I thought was my neighbor smoking a cigarette outside of his gate across the street, looking directly at me. For context, this is a normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, so he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. I get off of work late, so I usually see him and we wave, chat a little, then I go inside and he makes the joke he didn't see me smoking if my wife asks. So unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, grab my trash cans, open my squeaky iron gate, and take them out to the curb. I did not have my glasses on at the time, so as usual I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down the cigarette and quickly walked off down the street. It took a minute for me to register that he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk, but also maybe it was a guy taking a night walk and just stopped for a cigarette. I thought I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out, went back inside and laid on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point, I fell asleep and I woke up hearing my gate squeak and my German Shepherd mix growling. He's extremely protective of our family at home, but he's also the kind of dog you could take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Australian mix is more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tends to deter people. He's very friendly though. I quickly got up and pulled back my curtain. My gate was still shut and I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I looked out another window, which had a better view of my front yard and porch. I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still uneasy. I ended up watching television again because I couldn't go back to sleep. About an hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We are the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate and the noise it makes is so distinct. So I look out the curtain while my dogs are continuing to softly growl. My gate is halfway open but I don't see anyone. At this point, I'm panicking. In my panic, I couldn't find my phone. I grabbed my wooden baseball bat out of our room, crouched down, and started going through the couch cushions to get my phone. My dogs are oddly still quietly growling instead of barking, so I assumed no one was there. The minute I find my phone, my front door handle starts shaking. I run to the side door to let my German Shepherd mix out. I know he'll protect me and he can jump the 6-foot back gate. My Australian mix, going crazy, busts out one of our door side lights. I heard the guy say oh crap and immediately I let out my German Shepherd Pit Bull mix. I jumped up to look out the window, saw my dog latch on the guy's hand. The guy starts screaming and takes off down the street, my dog chasing him. I then become terrified he'll hurt my dog, so I run out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog is prancing down the street back to me, happy with blood all over his face. I call the police. They took another hour or so to show up and didn't seem to take me too seriously. They said they'd call local hospitals, calls, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home. I did buy my dogs giant steaks for being so good and saving me. I don't know what that guy wanted, but since then I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. A couple of years ago, I lived in a small apartment in the heart of a bustling city. My street was normally lively, filled with friendly neighbors and familiar faces. But there's one particular night I'll never forget, and it's not for pleasant reasons. I was coming home late from work. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the city was unusually quiet. The only sounds I heard were distant traffic and my footsteps echoing off the pavement. As I was walking to my apartment, I noticed a tall man wearing a worn-out brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat standing near my building's entrance. He seemed to be staring at something, but I couldn't tell what it was. Trying to shake off an uneasy feeling, I continued towards my building. Once I reached the entrance, I glanced over at the man and our eyes met, and he gave me an unsettling smile that sent a chill down my spine. I quickly averted my eyes and entered the building, my heart pounding. I told myself that I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was waiting for someone or had some business in the area, but something in the pit of my stomach told me that something was off. Once inside my apartment, I tried to relax. I made some tea and settled down with a book, but the image of that man's eerie smile lingered in my mind. About an hour later, I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I froze, straining my ears to hear better. It was a faint shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet. I peered through my peephole but saw nothing. I tried to convince myself that it was just a neighbor coming home late, but the uneasy feeling refused to go away. I double-checked my door's lock and decided to call it a night. As I lay in bed, I heard the noise again. This time, it was more pronounced. I got up, heart racing, and looked through the peephole once more. There he was, the man in the brown coat, standing right outside my door. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation in hushed tones. The operator assured me that officers were on their way. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, listening to the man's shuffling footsteps. It seemed like hours passed before I heard the police arrive. When they got there, the man was gone. The officers searched the building and the surrounding area but found no trace of him. They took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. Over the following weeks, I kept a watchful eye, always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man in the brown coat, but he never returned. I eventually moved out of that apartment, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The image of that eerie smile and the sound of shuffling feet outside my door still haunt my dreams. What was the man doing there? What did he want? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that his presence that night left me with a lingering sense of dread that I've never been able to shake. Months had passed since the incident with the man in the brown coat, but I couldn't shake the fear and anxiety that it had instilled in me. I moved into a new apartment, started a new job, and even adopted a dog for both companionship and protection. His name was Max, a loyal German shepherd who became my shadow. Despite the changes, I was still haunted by the memory. Nightmares would wake me up in a cold sweat, with the echo of shuffling feet in my ears and the image of that haunting smile in my mind. One day, as I was walking Max in my new neighborhood, something caught my eye. It was a glint of metal reflecting the sunlight. I approached, and to my horror, found a worn-out brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat hidden in the bushes. My heart stopped. The memories came flooding back. I hurriedly dialed the local police, who arrived promptly to investigate. The officers took the items and promised to look into it, but something told me that they didn't fully believe my story. After all, there were no witnesses, no evidence linking the coat and hat to my previous encounter. I became even more cautious. Every creak, every shadow, every stranger seemed like a potential threat. Max seemed to sense my anxiety, always alert and watchful. One night, as I was locking up my apartment, Max began to growl at the window. I looked out but saw nothing unusual. Still, his behavior put me on edge. I triple-checked the locks and settled down to watch some TV, Max by my side. Hours later, I was awoken by a soft scratching sound at the door. Max was up, ears perked, eyes fixed on the entrance. My heart was in my throat as I approached the door and peered through the peephole. The corridor was empty. I called the police again, but they found nothing amiss. I knew they were beginning to doubt my sanity, and truth be told, I was beginning to doubt it too. Days turned into weeks, and the anxiety was wearing me down. I decided to consult a therapist to help me deal with the lingering trauma. During our sessions, we explored my feelings of fear and paranoia. Slowly, I began to regain control over my life. The nightmares lessened, the anxiety waned, and I started to feel like myself again. Then, one day, I received a call from the police. They had identified the owner of the brown coat and hat. The man was a known criminal with a history of stalking and harassment. He had been caught in another city, wearing a different coat but carrying a photograph of my old apartment building. Suddenly, everything made sense. My my fears were justified. The man had been real, and he had been watching me. The police assured me that he was in custody and that I was safe, but the fear he instilled in me will never entirely go away. That chapter of my life is closed now, but the memories remain. They serve as a constant reminder to trust my instincts and be vigilant. To the man in the brown coat who haunted my life, I hope we never meet again. When I was 23, I moved to a new city for my first real job after college. It was an exciting but nerve-wracking time for me. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a nice part of town. The place had character and was relatively affordable. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with a warm smile and friendly demeanor. He lived in the building too and would often stop by to chat or help with any minor repairs. At first, I thought of him as a kind, grandfatherly figure. He would tell me stories about his youth, give advice about the city, and even bring homemade cookies sometimes. However, as weeks turned into months, I began to notice odd behaviors. He would knock on my door at strange hours, offering to fix things that weren't broken. He'd linger outside my window, seemingly watching me. When I'd catch him, he'd quickly scuttle away with a mumbled excuse. At first, I brushed it off as the quirks of an old man, but my gut began telling me that something was off. One evening, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. Panic welled up inside me, and I carefully pushed the door open. My heart was pounding as I scanned the room, but everything seemed in place. I called Mr. Thompson, who hurried over, concern etched on his face. He checked the apartment, reassuring me that everything was fine. He suggested the door might not have latched properly when I left. Still, the incident left me unnerved. I began to pay more attention to Mr. Thompson's behavior, growing increasingly suspicious. I noticed that he seemed to know things about me that I had never shared, like my daily schedule, my family back home, even my favorite foods. I began to wonder if he was going through my personal belongings. The thought was terrifying, but I had no concrete proof. The idea that the friendly old man I'd grown to trust could be violating my privacy seemed absurd. A few weeks later, I went on a short vacation with some friends. Before leaving, I set up a small hidden camera in my living room, more to ease my mind than anything else. I told myself that I was just being paranoid. When I returned, I immediately checked the footage, not expecting to find anything. I was wrong. The footage showed Mr. Thompson entering my apartment multiple times while I was away. He went through my drawers, examined my personal items, even sniffed my clothes. He sat on my couch, watching my television, eating food from my fridge. I was horrified and disgusted. The friendly facade had hidden something dark and twisted. I confronted Mr. Thompson, anger and fear in my voice. He stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but I was having none of it. I called the police, who arrived to take statements and review the footage. It turns out, I wasn't the first tenant to experience this. Previous renters have reported similar incidents, but there had never been enough evidence to take action. Mr. Thompson was arrested, and I immediately moved out, finding a new place across town. But that wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. As I was settling into my new home, I received a call from Detective Simmons, the officer handling my case. He informed me that they'd found something chilling during their search of Mr. Thompson's apartment. In a hidden compartment, they discovered photographs, journals, and personal items belonging to various tenants, including me. The journals were filled with detailed observations, fantasies, and plans. The realization that Mr. Thompson had been obsessively watching and documenting my life was a nightmare come true. I was left to grapple with the trauma, haunted by the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't discovered the truth. With therapy and the support of friends and family, I began to rebuild my life. But the sense of violation and betrayal lingered. Months after the discovery, my life had started to return to some semblance of normality. Mr. Thompson had been placed under house arrest, awaiting trial. I had a restraining order against him, but I still felt a lingering sense of unease. One day, I was scrolling through social media when I stumbled upon a profile that seemed oddly familiar. The profile picture was a blurred image, but something about it caught my eye. The account was following several people connected to me, friends, family, even colleagues. Curiosity getting the better of me, I began to dig deeper. What I found sent chills down my spine. The account had been posting pictures of me taken from afar at various locations around the city. Some were taken from outside my new apartment, others while I was out with friends or even grocery shopping. I immediately called Detective Simmons, who began an investigation. They traced the account but hit dead ends. It was all very professional, masked through various IP addresses, leaving no direct trace back to Mr. Thompson. But I knew it was him. The court date was drawing near, and I could feel the tension building. Sleep became elusive, and paranoia crept back into my life. One evening, while walking back home, I noticed a car that seemed to be following me. I tried to dismiss it as my mind playing tricks, but the nagging feeling persisted. I took a circuitous route home, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The car remained, always a block or two behind, never overtaking, never never stopping. Panicked, I called a friend who lived nearby and headed to their place instead of my own. The car continued to follow until I reached my friend's building, where I lost sight of it. My friend let me stay the night, and I explained the situation. Together we decided it was time to take more serious precautions. I hired a private security firm to watch my apartment and accompany me to and from work. They installed extra security measures, and I felt a small sense of relief. The day of the trial finally arrived, and I faced Mr. Thompson in court. His eyes, once warm and friendly, now looked cold and calculating. He denied everything, his lawyer painting me as an overreactive, paranoid young woman. But the evidence was solid, the hidden camera footage damning. Other former tenants came forward, bolstering my case. Mr. Thompson was found guilty and sentenced to several years in prison. I felt a weight lifted, but the victory was bittersweet. The social media account was shut down, and the stalking seemed to stop. But I knew that it wouldn't truly be over. I moved again, this time to a different city, leaving behind friends and a job I loved. I started fresh, determined not to let the experience define me. Years have passed, and I've built a new life. But the scars remain. Trust doesn't come easily, and I always find myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that familiar face or the glint of a camera lens. I often think about the other tenants, those who didn't realize what was happening, and wonder how many lives Mr. Thompson has silently invaded. I share this story now as a warning and a reminder. Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. To Mr. Thompson, the landlord who turned my life into a living nightmare, let's never meet again. I never thought I'd find myself typing out this story, but the events of last summer still haunt me. I need to share this experience with someone, and I hope it serves as a warning to others. I live in a medium-sized town where everyone knows everyone else. It's a safe community, and crime is rare. I work as a nurse in the local hospital, and the night shifts often have me driving home in the early hours of the morning. It was a humid summer night when my life took a chilling turn. I had just finished a particularly draining shift, and all I wanted was to get home and collapse into bed. As I made my way to my car, I noticed a man standing near the hospital entrance, watching me. His gaze was unblinking, and he seemed out of place. I shook off the uneasy feeling, attributing it to exhaustion. I got into my car and drove off, paying no further attention to the man yet. The next day, I had almost forgotten the encounter until my neighbor, Sarah, mentioned seeing a strange man walking around our street. I felt a pang of anxiety, but brushed it off. It's a free country, after all. Days turned into weeks, and life went on as usual. But then, something strange started happening. I began noticing a black sedan following me. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but the pattern became clear. The car would be there when I left work, keeping a distance but always in my rearview mirror. I never got a good look at the driver. I decided to tell my brother, James, who's a cop. He told me it was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me, but promised to keep an eye out. One evening, as I was heading home, the black sedan was there again. Panic set in, and I decided to drive to the police station instead of going home. The car followed me all the way but abruptly turned away as I pulled into the station. I reported the incident, and the police took it seriously. They sent a patrol car to follow me home that night, but the black sedan was nowhere to be seen. Weeks passed without any incident, and I started to feel silly for being so paranoid. Maybe it was just my imagination. Then one night, everything changed. I arrived home after a long shift, feeling utterly drained. As I approached my front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I immediately called the police. They arrived quickly and searched the house. There was no sign of forced entry, but my bedroom was a mess. Clothes were thrown everywhere, drawers were open, and personal belongings were scattered. Nothing was missing, except for some photographs of me. The police took the incident seriously and started an investigation. They advised me to stay with family, but I couldn't leave my home. I had worked hard for it, and I wouldn't be chased away. I installed a security system, adopted a large dog named Max, and took self-defense classes. But the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Weeks turned into months without any new incidents, and life began to return to normal. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photograph of me taken from outside my bedroom window. On the back, written in the same shaky handwriting, were the words, "I'm still watching you." The police were called again, and this time they managed to find some fingerprints on the envelope. After some investigation, they matched them to a man who had been arrested years ago for stalking. His name was Thomas, and he had just been released from prison. They brought him in for questioning, but there wasn't enough evidence to hold him. I was terrified, knowing that my stalker was out there, still watching me. But then, something unexpected happened. Thomas was found dead in his apartment, an apparent suicide. The police concluded their investigation, and the case was closed. After moving to a new town, I found myself in a peaceful community nestled between beautiful mountains nights and serene lakes. I loved my new job, my new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Max, my faithful dog, was with me every step of the way, providing comfort and a sense of security. But that nagging fear never entirely left me. I began volunteering at a local support group for people who had experienced stalking or harassment. Sharing my story with others who had been through similar ordeals helped me, and I became passionate about helping others heal. Months went by, and I was finally starting to feel like my old self. I even began dating a wonderful man named Mike, who knew my past and was incredibly supportive. Life was good. Then one day, while sorting through some old boxes, I stumbled across a newspaper clipping that my brother James had sent me after Thomas's death. I had never really looked at it closely before, but something caught my eye. There was a picture of Thomas, but standing next to him was a woman I recognized. A chill ran down my spine as I realized it was Sarah, my former neighbor. Memories rushed back, and pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah had mentioned seeing a strange man in our neighborhood. She was the one who had first alerted me to the possibility of someone watching me. My hands were shaking as I called James. I explained what I had found, and he promised to look into it. Days turned into weeks as James dug into Sarah's background. What he uncovered was terrifying. Sarah had been Thomas's accomplice. They had met in a support group for people with mental health issues. Together, they developed an obsession with me for reasons I still don't fully understand. With Thomas's death, the police had closed the case. But now, with this new information, they reopened it and immediately began searching for Sarah. She had moved, changed her name, and seemingly vanished. But I knew that she was still out there, and the fear returned with a vengeance. Mike was my rock during this time, always there to comfort me and keep me sane. But even he couldn't chase away the nightmares that plagued me. Months went by without any news, and I began to lose hope that Sarah would ever be found. Then, one day, a call came from James. They had found Sarah. She had been living in a small town, not far from where I had moved. When they arrested her, she had photographs, letters, and even personal belongings of mine in her possession. The trial was a blur. Sarah was found guilty of stalking, harassment, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, but even with her behind bars, the scars remain. I've continued to work with the support group, turning my experience into a force for good. I've become an advocate for victims, pushing for stronger laws and support systems. Life has moved on, and I'm stronger for having gone through this nightmare, but I know I'll never forget. I share this story as a warning and a plea. Trust your instincts, be aware of your surroundings, and never underestimate the importance of personal safety. And to Sarah, the woman who betrayed my trust and turned my life upside down, let's never meet again. So, this happened a couple of years ago, and I've only just found the courage to write about it. It's something that has haunted me since, and I thought sharing might help me cope. I had just moved to a new city, and I was living alone for the first time. My apartment was located in a reasonably good area, but being new, I didn't know anyone. A month or so into my new life, I began to notice some odd occurrences. It started with small things. Sometimes I would come home to find my curtains drawn when I was sure I had left them open, or lights turned off that I had left on. I brushed it off as being forgetful or the work of my landlord who perhaps entered the apartment while I was at work. A few weeks later, it escalated. I found a picture frame on my bedside table face down. It contained a photograph of my family. This sent a chill down my spine, but again, I rationalized it as maybe the wind knocking it over or something equally benign. Then, the letters started to arrive. The first letter was a simple, "Hi, welcome to the neighborhood." It was unsigned and written in what looked like a child's handwriting. I figured it was a neighbor trying to be friendly and thought little of it. The next letter, however, was not so innocent. "I hope you like living here. I'm watching you." My heart stopped when I read those words. I immediately checked all the locks on my doors and windows. Nothing seemed out of place. I began to keep my curtains closed and double-checked everything before leaving my apartment. A week went by and another letter arrived. This one was even more disturbing. "You look beautiful in that blue dress today." That was the exact dress I'd worn to work that day. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, realizing that this was not a random occurrence. Someone was watching me. I immediately contacted the police, who took my statement and advised me to keep a record of anything strange. They said they would patrol the area more frequently, but there wasn't much else they could do without more evidence. Days turned into weeks, and the letters continued. They grew more and more personal, describing what I had done during the day, what I had eaten, and even what I had watched on TV. I felt trapped, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. One night, I woke up to the sound of tapping on my window. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept towards the noise. I peeked through the curtains and saw a shadowy figure standing outside, looking up at my window. I screamed and called the police, who arrived within minutes. They searched the area but found nothing. No evidence, no footprints, nothing. I was losing sleep, becoming paranoid, and feeling like I was losing my mind. A few days later, I received a package. Inside was a lock of my hair and a note. I could be closer if I wanted. Be thankful I'm not. I broke down, terrified for my life. The police took the package as evidence, and finally they had something tangible to work with. After an exhaustive investigation, they discovered that a man living in my building had been stalking me. He had access to the building's security cameras and had been following me for months, watching my every move. The man was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. As it turned out, he had a history of similar behavior, and I was just his latest victim. Life seemed to return to normal, but the deep-rooted fear from that experience still clung to me. I became involved in a local support group for people who had been through similar traumas. It helped, but my confidence in the world had been shaken. The man was found guilty and a restraining order was issued. Knowing that he was behind bars gave me a sense of security, but I was still looking over my shoulder constantly, always alert to any sign of danger. Months turned into years, and the scars began to heal. I moved into a new relationship and started to rebuild my life. But as much as I wanted to put the past behind me, there were still those nights when I would wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the terror I'd felt. Then, one day, I received a call that sent my world crashing down again. The man had been released on parole. My heart dropped into my stomach as the officer explained the terms of his release, assuring me that he would still be monitored and that the restraining order was still in effect. But all I could think of was him out there, possibly still obsessed with me. My partner, aware of my past, was incredibly supportive. We installed a new security system, and I informed my workplace and friends about the situation. But the nagging fear returned, consuming me once again. Weeks went by without incident, and I tried to convince myself that he had moved on. Maybe he had changed, found help, and was no longer a threat. Then, one evening, I received an anonymous email. The message was short and chilling. I still remember you. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands trembled as I showed the email to my partner. We contacted the police immediately, but without concrete proof that it was him, there wasn't much they could do. I changed my email address, deleted my social media profiles, and once again became a prisoner to my fear. Days turned into weeks, and nothing else happened, but the damage was done. I felt his presence in every shadow, saw his face in every crowd. The life I had rebuilt was unraveling once more. I decided to take control of the situation. I hired a private investigator to watch him to ensure that he wasn't violating the restraining order. The information came back clear. He had a job, was attending therapy, and seemed to be leading a normal life. But I knew better. One night, after months of restless anxiety, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I packed my bags, sat down with my partner, and explained that I needed to leave. I needed a fresh start, far away from the city that held so many painful memories. He understood and supported me, promising to visit and keep our relationship alive. I moved across the country, found a new job, and began to rebuild once more. Slowly but surely, the fear began to subside, replaced by a newfound determination to live my life on my terms. Years have passed since then, and I have found peace at last, but the lessons from that time still shape who I am today. I've become an advocate for stalking victims, using my story to help others. I write this not as a victim, but as a survivor, and to anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine, know this: you are stronger than you think, and you are never alone. As for the man who once stalked me, I hope you found the help you needed, and wherever you are, let's never meet again. Living in a small town, you never really think that anything dangerous could happen to you. That's why, on a beautiful summer evening, I decided to take a stroll to a nearby park. I often went there to read a book, watch the sunset, and enjoy some peace. On this particular day, I noticed something unusual: a white van parked at the edge of the parking lot. It didn't look like any service vehicle I had seen before. It had no windows, and there were no logos or business markings. Something about it sent a chill down my spine, but I shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. As I settled into my favorite spot under a large oak tree, I pulled out my book and began to read. The park was quiet, and I was lost in my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near the van. A man was standing there, looking directly at me. He was tall, had a scruffy beard, and wore a stained red baseball cap. Our eyes met, and I felt my heart skip a beat. He didn't look away. I tried to return to my book, telling myself I was overreacting, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. After a few minutes, I looked up again, and the man was gone. Relief washed over over me, but it was short-lived. I heard footsteps. Glancing around, I spotted him again, now walking towards me, his eyes still fixed on me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, and I didn't hesitate. I quickly gathered my things and began walking towards the exit, never looking back. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, so I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and sped away. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I got home, locked all the doors, and called the police. They took my statement, but said there was little they could do without more evidence. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next day, I spotted the white van again, this time parked near my workplace. Panic set in, but I told myself it was a coincidence. Days turned into weeks, and I kept seeing the van outside my house near my gym, always lurking. I never saw the man's face again, but I knew he was there watching. I reported each sighting to the police, but they were never able to catch him in the act. My friends and family were supportive, but I could tell they were skeptical. I began to feel like I was going crazy. Then, one evening, everything changed. I was leaving a friend's house, and as I walked to my car, I saw the van parked across the street. Fear gripped me, but I was tired of running. I pulled out my phone and began recording. I approached the van, my hands shaking. I could see movement inside, and as I got closer, I realized the door was slightly ajar. I was about to call the police when I heard a whimper. My blood ran cold as I approached the door, my mind racing with what I might find. The whimper turned into a cry, and I knew I had to act. I pulled open the door and was met with a sight that will haunt me forever. Inside were several children, bound and gagged, their eyes wide with terror. I immediately called 911, my voice trembling as I described what I had found. The operator told me to stay put, but I knew I had to get those children to safety. I quickly untied them and led them to my car, all the while looking over my shoulder for the man. The police arrived within minutes, and the children were taken to safety. An investigation was launched, and the man was eventually caught. He was part of a human trafficking ring that had been operating in the area for years. I was hailed as a hero, but I didn't feel like one. The trauma of what I had experienced and what I had seen stayed with me. I moved away from that town, needing a fresh start, but I know I'll never forget what happened. I'll never forget those children's faces, the terror in their eyes, or the man who stalked me. Months had passed since the harrowing encounter with the man in the red baseball cap, and I had settled into my new life in a different town. I was seeing a therapist to help deal with the trauma, and things were starting to feel normal again. But deep down, I knew I couldn't just move on. The experience had changed me, awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. I became involved in advocacy work, volunteering with organizations dedicated to combating human trafficking. I shared my story at seminars and workshops, hoping to raise awareness about this heinous crime that lurked in the shadows of our communities. One day, I was approached by a detective named Sarah who was working on human trafficking cases. She had heard my story and wanted my help. At first, I was hesitant. The memories were still fresh, and the idea of getting involved in a real investigation terrified me. But Sarah was persistent, and I realized that I had a unique perspective that could make a difference. I agreed to help. Working with Sarah, I began to understand the depth and complexity of the problem. It was more widespread than I had ever imagined, and it was happening right under our noses. We focused on a particular case that had been troubling the local police for months. Girls were going missing, and there were few leads. The only connection was a series of mysterious social media accounts that lured young women with promises of modeling contracts or lucrative jobs. I immersed myself in the online world, trying to understand how these predators operated. It was a dark and disturbing journey, and I often felt overwhelmed by the sheer depravity I encountered. But I kept going, driven by a determination to make a difference. After weeks of painstaking research and analysis, we began to see a pattern. We identified several key players who were part of an organized ring. They were using sophisticated methods to target vulnerable young women, lure them in, and then exploit them. With this information, the police were able to launch a sting operation. I was involved every step of the way, working closely with Sarah and her team. The day of the operation was nerve-wracking. We had one chance to catch these criminals in the act, and the stakes were high. As the hours ticked by, I watched from a surveillance van, my heart pounding in my chest. The tension was palpable, and I couldn't help but think about the girls whose lives were on the line. Finally, the moment came. The police swooped in, arresting several key members of the ring. The operation was a success, and I felt a surge of triumph mixed with relief. In the following weeks, the full extent of the operation was revealed. Dozens of girls were rescued, and a network of traffickers was dismantled. I knew that our work was just a small victory in a much larger battle, but it felt like a step in the right direction. The experience strengthened my resolve to continue fighting against human trafficking. I knew that I had a role to play, and I was committed to doing everything I could to make a difference. I also realized that healing was possible. By facing my fears and channeling them into something positive, I have found a way to move forward. So to anyone who finds themselves in a dark place, know that there is hope. There is a way out, and you are stronger than you think. To the man in the red baseball baseball cap and all those like him know that there are people out there who won't stop fighting. We won't back down and we won't be silenced. Let's never meet again. I live in a relatively quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows each other and we all get along just fine. Well, that's what I used to think at least 3 years ago. I moved into my dream home. It's a quaint 2-story house with a white picket fence and a spacious backyard where my dog, Rufus, loves to play. The neighborhood seemed perfect, the neighbors friendly, and everything was going well. But then something strange started happening. It began with the mail. I noticed that letters were arriving open and some packages seemed to have been tampered with. At first, I thought it was just the postman being careless, but it kept happening. Then there were the phone calls. I would pick up the phone and there would be silence on the other end. Sometimes I could hear breathing, but they would always hang up before I could say anything. I started feeling uneasy and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I would see shadows moving outside my windows at night and hear strange noises coming from the yard. I reported these incidents to the police, but without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed security cameras around the house, hoping to catch whoever was messy with me. I even bought a new, stronger lock for the front door and started being more vigilant about keeping all the windows locked. Weeks went by without any further incidents and I started to feel safe again. But then, one night, everything changed. I was lying in bed, reading a book, when I heard a noise coming from the living room. It sounded like a soft thud, like something had been knocked over. My heart started pounding and I grabbed the baseball bat I had started keeping next to my bed. I tiptoed down the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. As I reached the bottom, I could see that the front door was slightly ajar. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized someone had been inside my house. I quickly searched the rooms, but there was no one there. Nothing seemed to be missing, but I knew something was off. I immediately called the police, who came and searched the house as well. They found nothing but promised to keep a closer eye on my property. The next day, I reviewed the footage from the security cameras, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, clear as day, was a man I had never seen before, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and gloves, lurking around my house. He had been watching me through the windows, and then he had tried the front door. Finding it unlocked, he had entered. He spent less than a minute inside, glancing around the living room before leaving the way he came. I handed the footage over to the police, who finally had something concrete to go on. The investigation led them to a man living just 2 streets away from me. This house was filled with pictures of me, my family, and even my dog. There were notes detailing my daily routine, my habits, and my likes and dislikes. It turns out, he had become obsessed with me after seeing me at a local grocery store. He had been stalking me for months, watching my every move, learning everything he could about me. The police arrested him, and he was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, and harassment. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to several years in prison. Life slowly began to return to normal after the stalker was arrested. I was still on edge, but knowing he was behind bars helped me feel a bit more secure. My friends and family were incredibly supportive, and Rufus, my loyal dog, never left my side. However, I wasn't quite ready to let my guard down completely. I continued to double check the locks and monitor the security cameras regularly. About 6 months after the incident, I received a letter in the mail. It was a formal notice informing me that the stalker had escaped from prison. My heart stopped. All the fears and anxieties that I had been working so hard to overcome came rushing back. The police were on high alert, conducting a manhunt for the escapee, but he was nowhere to be found. They stationed an officer outside my house and advised me to stay with friends or family. I decided to go stay with my sister in a neighboring town. I didn't want to take any chances. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of the man. I followed the news closely, hoping for an update, but all I found were stories about other escaped convicts and criminals. I felt trapped, like a prisoner in my own life. I knew I couldn't hide forever, but the thought of returning home terrified me. Finally, after 2 agonizing months, I received a call from Detective Simmons, the officer in charge of my case. They had found the man. He had been hiding in a secluded cabin in the woods, just a few miles from my house. Inside, they found more pictures of me and detailed plans for his next move. It was clear he had intended to come after me again. The relief I felt was indescribable. I could finally breathe again. I could finally go home. I returned to my house, accompanied by friends, and started the process of reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy, and the memories of what had happened still haunted me, but I was determined to move on. I became involved in support groups for stalking victims, sharing my story, and helping others who had gone through similar experiences. I realized that I wasn't alone, and that by speaking out, I could make a difference. I also made changes to my home, adding more security measures, and even adopted another dog, a protective German Shepherd named Max, to keep Rufus company. Slowly but surely, I began to feel safe again. Looking back, I could see how much I've grown and changed as a result of this terrifying ordeal. I've become stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the world around me. I've learned to trust my instincts, to take action, and to never underestimate the importance of personal safety. But most of all, I've learned that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to overcome, to heal, and to rebuild our lives. So to anyone out there who's struggling with fear or trauma, know that you're not alone. Reach out for help, trust in yourself, and never give up. And to the man who stalked me, who invaded my life and my home, let's never meet again. I'm moving on, and I'm leaving you behind. I've always enjoyed walking through the park in the evenings. The way the trees would catch the light of the setting sun and the distant laughter of kids playing always filled me with a sense of peace. That is until one summer evening, something happened that I'll never forget. It started as a regular walk through my local park, a big open space filled with trees and small walking trails in the suburbs. On that day, I decided to explore a path I'd never been down before. I figured it would be a nice change of pace, and besides, I was in the mood for some adventure. I started down the narrow trail, flanked by tall, whispering trees. The path was less maintained, with overgrown grass and bushes scratching at my legs. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, the only sound being my footsteps on the worn path. I was about halfway down the trail when I heard something that sent a chill down my spine, a faint rustling in the bushes behind me. I paused and turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. It must be a squirrel or a bird, I told myself, and continued on my way. But the rustling persisted, always seeming to be just a few steps behind me. It grew louder and more deliberate, and a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Something was wrong. I quickened my pace and pulled out my phone, ready to call someone if necessary. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every instinct told me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. The rustling grew closer, and I knew that I was not alone. I made it to the end of the trail, which opened into a small clearing. I glanced behind me one more time, and that's when I saw him, a man dressed in tattered clothing, his face obscured by a hood. He was lurking at the edge of the trail, watching me. His eyes, pale and wild, were fixed on me, and they filled me with an indescribable terror. I've never run so fast in my life. I sprinted back down the path, not daring to look back, all the while hearing his footsteps chasing after me. My mind was racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I knew I needed to find a way out, to get back to the main park area where people would be. The man's footsteps were relentless, always just a few steps behind me. I could hear his heavy breathing and feel his presence like a dark shadow. Finally, I saw the familiar trail that led back to the park. I made a sharp turn, hoping to lose him, but he was still there, always following me. I made it to the main area of the park, where there were still a few people around. I ran up to a group of joggers, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. They were kind enough to call the police, and I stayed with them until the officers arrived. I gave them a description of the man, and they searched the area, but he was gone. The trail and the clearing were empty, only the whispering trees bearing witness to what had occurred. The police took my statement and advised me to avoid that trail in the future. They said they would keep an eye on the area, but I knew in my heart that I would never go back there again. Weeks turned into months, and the incident became a haunting memory, always lingering in the back of my mind. I would often find myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those pale, wild eyes watching me. I later found out that the trail had been the site of some criminal activity in the past, but nothing like what I had experienced. The man was never found, and the trail was eventually closed off. A few months after the incident, life had mostly returned to normal. I found new places to walk, new trails to explore, always careful to stay in areas where people were around. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, haunted by the memory of those pale, wild eyes. Then something happened that I never could have anticipated. I was driving home from work one evening, following my usual route, when I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of tattered clothing, a hooded figure standing on the side of the road. I felt my heart jump into my throat, but I told myself it couldn't be the same man. It was just a coincidence. But as the days went on, I started seeing him more often, always at a distance, always watching. I began to feel paranoid, looking over my shoulder constantly, checking the locks on my doors and windows every night. I even considered moving, but something told me that it wouldn't make a difference. I decided to go to the police again, telling them what I'd seen. They were sympathetic, but told me that without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. They suggested that it might be my mind playing tricks on me, the trauma of the incident still fresh in my mind. I wanted to believe them, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. I started taking different routes to work, changing my routines, hoping to shake him off. but he always seemed to find me. He was never close enough for me to confront him, always lurking in the shadows. A fear began to affect my daily life. I started to lose sleep, my mind filled with nightmares of being chased, those pale, wild eyes always watching. I became withdrawn, avoiding social events and staying home as much as possible. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I made up my mind. I was going to end this one way or another. I hired a private investigator, giving him all the information I had, including the description of the man and the locations where I had spotted him. The investigator was skeptical at first but agreed to look into it. Weeks went by and I heard nothing. The sightings continued and my fear grew. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Then, one day, I got a call from the investigator. We found him, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. He went on to explain that the man had been living in an abandoned building not far from where I lived. He had been watching me, tracking my movements. The investigator found journals filled with notes about me, pictures taken from afar, and other disturbing evidence. The police were called, and the man was arrested. He was identified as a known stalker with a history of mental illness. He had fixated on me for reasons I'll never understand. I felt a mixture of relief and horror, knowing that my instincts had been right all along. The trial was a blur, and the man was sentenced to a psychiatric facility where he could receive the help he clearly needed. The experience changed me in ways I never could have imagined. I had become more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I no longer take my safety for granted, but more than anything, I've learned to trust my instincts. They were what kept me safe, what led me to take action. To the man with the pale, wild eyes, let's not meet again. And to anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, trust your gut. You never know when it might save your life. It was the summer after my sophomore year of college when I took a job as a delivery driver for a local pizza place. The job was simple: take orders, load up my car, and drop off the food. I figured it would be easy money, but there was one delivery that changed everything. It started on a regular Friday night. The place was buzzy with calls, and the ovens were working overtime. Around 8:30 p.m., an order came in for a delivery to the outskirts of town, an area I wasn't very familiar with. The instructions were specific: leave the pizza at the back door, ring bell 3 times, cash under the mat. Strange, I thought, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I took down the address, grabbed the order, and headed out into the night. My old car's headlights illuminated the dark roads as I made my way to the edge of town, guided by my GPS. The house was nestled at the end of a long, winding driveway, surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. The whole place had a neglected look about it, with peeling paint and windows that were too dark to see through. I parked my car and grabbed the pizzas, my mind on the cash tip waiting for me under the mat. As I approached the back door, I noticed how quiet it was. There were no lights on in the house, no sounds of people inside, just the distant chirping of crickets and the rustling of the wind. I placed the pizza boxes by the back door as instructed and rang the bell 3 times. As I reached under the mat for the money, something caught my eye. A glimmer of light from a window, a shadow moving inside. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Who was watching me? I grabbed the cash and hurried back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house one more time. The front door was open. I didn't waste any time getting back to the pizza place, my mind racing with questions. Who lived there? Why did they want the delivery at the back door? And what was that shadow? When I got back, I told my manager about the strange delivery. He laughed it off, telling me I was letting my imagination get the best of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few weeks, I continued my regular deliveries, trying to forget about that night. But then, the calls started. At first, they were just hang-ups. I'd answer the phone, hear a breath on the other end, and then silence. But they grew more frequent, always coming from the same number. Then, one night, the caller spoke. 3 rings. Back door. You know where. The voice was low, raspy, almost a whisper. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who is this? I demanded, but the line went dead. I looked up the number, and my blood ran cold. It was the same address as the strange delivery. I told my manager about the call, but again, he brushed it off. Just a prank, he said, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. Days turned into weeks, and the calls continued. Always the same message, always the same voice. 3 rings. Back door. You know where. I started to feel like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of shadows in the rearview mirror, hear footsteps behind me when I was out on deliveries. I became paranoid, always looking over my shoulder, jumping at the slightest sound. One night, I was closing up the shop, locking the doors, and turning off the lights when I heard it. A ring, then another, then a third. My heart stopped. I looked out the window, and there, standing by the back door, was a figure. Tall, hooded, obscured by shadows. shadows. 3 rings, back door, you know where. I don't remember how I got home that night. All I remember is the terror, the certainty that I was in danger. I quit the job the next day, unable to shake the fear that had taken hold of me. I moved to a different town, changed my number, and tried to start fresh. Months after leaving the town and the job behind, I found myself settling into a new routine, living in a new place, and making new friends. The nightmares were less frequent, and the memories of that summer began to fade into the background. But something about it still nagged at me. The voice, the shadow, the rings, they were all connected somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. One day, while browsing online, I stumbled across a news story that made my blood run cold. A house on the outskirts of my old town had burned down. Firefighters had discovered the charred remains of an old man inside. The report said he was a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors, living alone in the decaying house. It was the same house I delivered the pizza to. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read further. The investigators had found something strange in the wreckage, a room filled with photographs, maps, and notes. All of them were of me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The man had been stalking me, watching my every move, tracking my routines, even calling me to taunt me with his cryptic messages. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could see were those pale, wild eyes watching me from the shadows. The article went on to say that the fire had been ruled an accident, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The timing, the location, the eerie connection to my own experiences, it all pointed to something more sinister. I began to dig deeper, scouring online records and newspaper archives, driven by a need to understand what had really happened. What I found was a dark web of secrets, lies, and obsession. The man had been a notorious criminal in his younger days, known for stalking and terrorizing his victims before striking. He'd been caught and imprisoned but had been released on parole years before I'd ever set foot in that town. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. His obsession with me had been no accident. He'd chosen me, targeted me for reasons I'll never truly understand. His notes were filled with twisted fantasies, plans for what he wanted to do to me. The calls, the rings, the shadow in the window, they were all part of his game, a way to draw me into his web. The fire, I realized, had been no accident. It had been a cover-up, a way to erase the evidence of his obsession. I went to the police with what I'd found, but they were skeptical. The fire had been ruled an accident, they said, and the case was closed. But I knew the truth. I knew what the man had planned, what he'd wanted to do to me. I've moved on since then, building a new life in a new place, far away from the memories of that summer. But I'll never forget the fear, the terror, the knowledge that I'd been targeted by a madman. I still find myself looking over my shoulder, still hear the ring of the bell in my ears. 3 rings, back door, you know where. To the man who stalked me, who planned to make me his victim, let's not meet again. And to anyone who reads this, trust your instincts. If something feels off, if you feel like you're being watched, don't brush it off. You never know when it might save your life. I've always considered myself observant, someone who notices little details. But it wasn't until I experienced a series of unsettling events that I realized just how much those details can matter. It began with a job relocation that brought me to a new city. As an introverted single woman in my late 20s, I was anxious but excited about starting fresh in an unfamiliar place. I found a charming 1-bedroom apartment in a historic building. The landlord seemed pleasant enough, a middle-aged man who lived on the first floor. He assured me the neighborhood was safe and the tenants were quiet, which sounded perfect to me. Things were normal for the first few weeks. I settled into my new job, explored the city, and began to feel more at home. That was until I noticed something odd about my next door neighbor. I'd see him in passing, usually in the evening when I got home from work. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and glasses that seemed too big for his face. He always carried a green backpack, and he seemed to be watching me. At first, I brushed it off as simple curiosity. Maybe he was just interested in the new neighbor. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd find him standing in the hallway when I left for work, his eyes fixed on my door as if waiting for me to come out. Once, I even caught him peeking through my living room window. It made me uneasy, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps he was just socially awkward or lonely. But then things took a darker turn. I started receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox. They were filled with disturbing messages, describing what I was wearing, what I was doing, even what I was eating. At first, I thought it was a sick joke, but when the letters continued, each one more detailed and invasive than the last, I knew it was something more. I went to my landlord, hoping he could help. I showed him the letters, explained my concerns about my neighbor, but he just shrugged it off, saying the man had lived there for years and had never caused any trouble. Frustrated and scared, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed a peephole in my door, started keeping my windows closed and blinds drawn, and began carrying pepper spray with me at all times. The letters continued, each one more chilling than the last. They were filled with thinly veiled threats, allusions to violence, and a growing obsession with me. I considered going to the police, but without concrete evidence, I worried they wouldn't take me seriously. Weeks turned into months, and the fear grew. I was constantly on edge, looking over my shoulder, listening for footsteps behind me. My life became consumed by the terror of what might happen if my neighbor decided to act on his twisted fantasies. Then, one night, it all came to a head. I was coming home late from work, my mind on a project I'd been struggling with. As I turned the key in my door, I noticed something out at the corner of my eye. The green backpack. It was in my apartment, tossed carelessly on the floor. My heart stopped as I realized what it meant. My neighbor had been inside my home. I backed away, my mind racing, and called the police. They arrived quickly, searching my apartment and finding evidence that someone had been there. They questioned my neighbor, but he denied everything. Without proof, they couldn't arrest him, but they warned him to stay away from me. I moved out the next day, staying with a friend until I found a new place to live. The terror of that night so haunts me, the knowledge that I'd been watched, stalked, and violated in my own home. But what scares me the most is the realization that I dismissed the signs, ignored my instincts, and allowed myself to believe it was all in my head. Though I had moved to a new apartment and taken all the necessary precautions, the sense of safety I once enjoyed was shattered. The experience with my neighbor had left a mark, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that green backpack or the piercing gaze of the man who had invaded my privacy. Months went by, and the memory began to fade. I immersed myself in work, making new friends, and rebuilding my life. Yet, there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a lingering doubt that I was truly free from my neighbor's obsession. Then, something happened that brought it all rushing back. I was out shopping one weekend when I saw him. He was standing at a corner, talking on his phone, that same green backpack slung over his shoulder. Panic welled up inside me, and I ducked into a nearby store, watching him through the window. He didn't seem to notice me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still following me. I waited until he was out of sight before leaving the store, but the fear stayed with me, a constant reminder that he was still out there. Days turned into weeks, and I continued to see him, always from a distance, always when I least expected it. At the grocery store, at the park, even at my workplace. He was there, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. I went to the police again, but without proof, they could do little to help. They suggested I keep a log of the incidents, take photos if I could, and report any suspicious behavior. I did as they suggested, but the sightings continued, each one more unsettling than the last. I considered moving again, even changing jobs, but I knew that running away wouldn't solve the problem. I needed to face it, to find a way to stop him once and for all. With the help of a friend who was a private investigator, I began to dig into my neighbor's past. What I found was a trail of obsession and harassment, a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. He had stalked other women before me, always watching, always waiting, never crossing the line into physical violence, but coming dangerously close. Armed with this new evidence, I went back to the police. This time, they took me seriously, launching an investigation into my neighbor's activities. It took time, patience, and determination, but eventually they were able to build a case against him. He was arrested, charged with stalking and harassment, and finally brought to justice. The trial was a grueling experience, forcing me to relive the fear and violation I had endured, but it was worth it, knowing that he would be held accountable for his actions, that other women would be safe from his twisted obsession. He was found guilty and sentenced to prison, a fitting end to a nightmare that had lasted far too long. In the years since, I've moved on, rebuilding my life and finding a sense of peace and security that I thought was lost forever. But the experience has changed me, taught me to trust my instincts and to never underestimate the power of obsession. To the man with the green backpack, the one who watched me, stalked me, and nearly destroyed my life, let's not meet again. And to anyone who reads this, remember that no one has the right to invade your privacy, to make you feel unsafe or violated. Trust your instincts, seek help if you need it, and never be afraid to stand up for yourself. You never know when those simple actions might make all the difference. I recently graduated college and landed a job in a small coastal town. I rented a quaint little house that sat on a quiet street lined with tall oaks. The rent was cheap, the landlord was friendly, and the sea was only a stone's throw away. It seemed like a dream. About a month after moving in, I started to notice a pattern. Every Thursday, around 10 p.m., I'd hear a car idling outside my house. It was distant, never loud enough to be alarming, but consistent enough to catch my attention. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor arriving home late, but the sound would linger, sometimes for hours. I'd lie in bed, listening to the gentle hum of the engine, and a feeling of unease would grow. One Thursday, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to take a look. I peeked through the blinds and saw a black sedan parked across the street. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't make out the driver. I remember feeling a chill. Something about that car didn't seem right. The next day, I mentioned it to a co-worker, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he grew serious and said, "You should report it to the police. We've had some burglaries around town recently." I felt silly calling the police over a parked car, but I followed his advice. The officer I spoke to said they'd send a patrol car to check it out the next Thursday, but the car didn't return that week, or the week after, or the one after that. I started to think I'd overreacted, that maybe it was just a coincidence. Fast forward a few months, and I had all but forgotten about the mysterious sedan. That was until I returned home one evening to find my front door ajar. Panic set in, and I called the police. I waited in my car as they searched my house. Nothing was missing, but they found evidence that someone had been inside. They asked about the black sedan, but I hadn't heard or seen it in weeks. I was rattled, and the police suggested I stay with a friend for a few nights. I followed their advice, and a coworker kindly offered his couch. A week passed, and I started to feel safe again. That's when the phone calls began. The first call came on a Thursday. I picked up, and there was silence on the other end. Thinking it was a wrong number, I hung up, but the calls kept coming, always on Thursdays, always silent. I reported it to the police, but there was little they could do without more evidence. I changed my number, but the calls continued. By this point, I was genuinely scared. I knew I was being targeted, but I didn't know why or by whom. I began to take precautions, installing security cameras and keeping my doors and windows locked at all times. Another month went by, and I started to receive letters. They were anonymous, filled with cryptic messages and veiled threats. The handwriting was shaky, and the words were chilling. The police were more involved by now, and they began to investigate seriously. They traced the letters and the calls but hit dead ends each time. I was living in a state of constant fear, knowing that someone was watching me, stalking me, but unable to stop them. Then, one Thursday night, I received a call that was different. The voice on the other end was raspy, and the words were slow and deliberate. "You can't escape." I felt a surge of terror and called the police immediately. They traced the call to a payphone near my house and sent officers to search the area. They found the black sedan, abandoned, with photos of me inside. The realization that I had been so closely watched, that my every move had been documented, sent me into a spiral of fear and anxiety. The police continued to investigate, but the trail went cold. They never found the person responsible. I moved away shortly after, leaving behind the coastal town and the house with the tall oaks. I changed jobs, changed my name, did everything I could to start fresh. Life had settled into a new normal, but the experience continued to haunt me. Despite moving to a different city and taking all the precautions, the terror of those events was something I couldn't shake off. Every once in a while, a car's engine would remind me of those nights, or the ring of the phone would send my heart racing. I even saw a therapist to help me cope with the lingering anxiety, but deep inside, I knew I would never feel completely safe again. About a year later, a break in the case came in the most unexpected way. I was watching the news one evening when a report about an arrest in a neighboring town caught my attention. The police had apprehended a man suspected of a series of burglaries and stalking incidents. The face that flashed on the screen sent a chill down my spine, the owner of that black sedan. I immediately contacted the detective who had handled my case. They reopened the investigation and found the connection. The man had been stalking multiple women, documenting their lives, and breaking into their homes. The pattern of behavior matched my experience precisely. His motives remained murky, and he proved to be an enigmatic figure during the interrogations. However, evidence gathered from his home showed a disturbing obsession with his victims. Notebooks filled with details, photographs taken without consent, and even personal items stolen from the women he stalked painted a terrifying picture. The legal process was long and draining. Testifying against him, facing the man who had turned my life upside down, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Other victims came forward too, each sharing their harrowing experiences. He was eventually convicted on multiple counts, including stalking, harassment, and breaking and entering. The judge's sentence was harsh, reflecting the gravity of his crimes. The conviction brought some closure, but the scars remained. The ordeal had changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and the trust I once had in people and my surroundings had eroded. Years have passed since those events, and I've managed to rebuild my life. I've found love, success in my career, and even bought a house of my own. Let the lessons I learned during that terrifying time continue to shape how I approach the world. I share my story not for sympathy but as a warning. I want others to understand that danger can lurk where you least expect it, and that listening to your intuition and taking precautions can make all the difference. The world can be a beautiful place, full of opportunity and joy, but it can also be dark and frightening. Trust your instincts, protect yourself, and never underestimate the importance of paying attention to those seemingly insignificant details. To the man who stalked me, who made me live in fear and taught me the hard way that evil can wear many faces, let's not meet again. And to anyone who reads this, remember that your safety is in your hands. Be vigilant, be aware, and never hesitate to reach out for help if something doesn't feel right. You never know when those small actions could save you from a nightmare you never saw coming. A couple of years ago, I was living in a small town that was a blend of suburban and rural environments. The people were friendly, but like any place, it had its quirks and stories that the townsfolk liked to share. There was this one particular street that was always spoken of in hushed tones. Evergreen Lane. Evergreen Lane was an old, windy road flanked by thick woods on either side. Some houses were scattered along the stretch, each one seemingly older and more worn than the last. People said it was haunted or cursed, but most dismissed those stories as mere urban legends. I didn't believe in those stories either, not until one chilly evening. I was driving home from work, tired and just wanting to get into my warm bed. My usual route was closed due to construction, so the detour took me through Evergreen Lane. It was dark, and the thick trees seemed to swallow up the beams of my headlights. Halfway down the road, my car sputtered and died. I tried not to panic. I told myself it was just a coincidence, not some curse of Evergreen Lane. My cell phone had no signal, which was common in this secluded area. The only solution was to walk to the nearest house and ask for help. I began my trek down the dark, lonely road, every noise amplifying my growing unease. Then, in the distance, I saw a dim light from a window. It was a house, old and seemingly abandoned, but the light was a welcoming beacon. As I approached the house, I noticed that the light was coming from a candle in the window. The door was slightly ajar. My gut told me something was off, but the cold and my desperation pushed me forward. I knocked softly and called out, "Hello, my car broke down and I need some help. Can I use your phone?" No response. I knocked again, louder this time, but still no answer. I pushed the door open slightly and peered inside. It was eerily quiet. The house was furnished but looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my weight, and I could feel the air thick with something I couldn't describe. I found an old landline and picked it up, but there was no dial tone. That's when I heard it, a faint whispering sound coming from upstairs. My heart started to pound, and a chill ran down my spine. I knew I should leave, but something drew me towards the noise. I crept up the stairs, each step seeming to echo through the house. The whispering grew louder, and I could almost make out words, but they were in a language I didn't understand. I reached the top of the stairs and saw a door slightly ajar, the same faint candlelight flickering from inside the room. I pushed the door open, and what I saw will haunt me forever. An old woman, her back to me, was chanting in front of a strange symbol drawn on the floor. Her voice was hypnotic, her words unintelligible. Around her were pictures. Some of them looked like people from the town, and others were unfamiliar. I must have made a noise because she suddenly stopped and turned. Her eyes were black, completely devoid of color, and they bored to me with an intensity that froze me in place. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice like the wind through dead trees. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only stare into those soulless eyes. "You've seen too much," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "You'll never leave Evergreen Lane." I don't know what broke the spell, but I suddenly found the strength to move. I turned and ran, my only thought to get away from that house and the terrifying woman. I stumbled down the stairs and out the door, never looking back. I ran until I reached my car, my breath ragged and my body trembling. Somehow, my car started right up, as if nothing had been wrong with it. I drove away from Evergreen Lane, vowing never to return. I never spoke of what happened that night. The memories were too raw, too terrifying, but I know that something unnatural resides on Evergreen Lane, something that defies explanation. The terror of that night haunted me for years, and the unease never really left me. It was a chapter of my life I wanted to forget, a road I never wanted to revisit. But fate, it seems, had other plans. A few years later, I found myself returning to that small town for a family gathering. My parents still lived there, and they insisted on seeing me after all the time that had passed. I agreed to come, promising myself that I would steer clear of Evergreen Lane. The reunion with my family was pleasant, filled with shared memories and laughter, but there was a cloud hanging over me, a weight pulling me back to that dark chapter. One evening, as my father and I were sharing drinks, he began to talk about the town and its history. The stories of Evergreen Lane came up, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "You know, son, those stories about Evergreen Lane are all made up," my father said, looking at me intently. I tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, Dad, it's just an old road with creepy trees. Every town has one." He shook his head, his expression serious. "No, I'm afraid it's more than that. Did you ever hear about that old woman who lived there?" I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to keep my composure. "An old woman? No, I never heard about her." My father leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She was a witch, or at least that's what they say. Some people in town claim to have seen her perform dark rituals, connecting her to the other side. She vanished one day, and no one knows what happened to her." My blood ran cold, and images from that night flooded back to me. I knew he was talking about the same woman, the same house. "Dad," I finally said, my voice trembling, "I think I've seen her." He looked at me, his eyes wide. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, knowing how crazy it would sound, but I had to tell him. I recounted the whole story, leaving nothing out. My father listened in silence, his face pale. When I finished, he looked at me, his eyes filled with fear and disbelief. "Son, we need to find out what's going on there. That house, that woman, it's all connected to something much darker. Despite my terror, I knew he was right. The mystery of Evergreen Lane was calling me back, and I couldn't ignore it. The next day, armed with flashlights and a determination to uncover the truth, my father and I set out for Evergreen Lane. The road was just as I remembered, dark and foreboding. The trees seemed to reach out to us, their branches like gnarled fingers. As we approached the house, I felt the same sense of dread that I had felt years ago. But this time, I was not alone. We cautiously entered, finding the house just as abandoned and worn as before. The memories were vivid, and I could almost hear the old woman's chanting. We searched the house, finding clues to the woman's dark practices, books on witchcraft, strange symbols, and more pictures of people from the town. Finally, we came across a hidden room in the basement, a room filled with evidence of rituals and dark magic. In the center of the room was a book, old and worn, filled with spells and incantations. It became clear that the old woman had been connecting with something evil, something that had a grip on Evergreen Lane. We need to destroy this, my father said, his voice filled with conviction. We need to break the curse of Evergreen Lane. We gathered everything, determined to burn it all, to erase the dark stain on the town's history. As the flames consumed the symbols, the books, and the remnants of the old woman's dark practices, I felt a weight lift. The air seemed to clear, and a sense of peace settled over the house. Evergreen Lane was finally free. As we walked back to our car, I looked back at the house one last time. The memories were still there, the terror still real, but the evil was gone. I had faced my fear, uncovered the truth, and broken the curse of Evergreen Lane. But the haunting image of the old woman's black eyes would never leave me, a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places. Let's not meet again. Evergreen Lane. Let's never meet again. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.